I bought a used car from my son's father-in-law, but the GPS had a single saved address labeled, "The End of the Line." I just figured it was some old man's morbid joke. Curious, I drove there. The road led to a deserted, windswept cliff overlooking the ocean. An elderly woman was waiting for me. She looked me in the eyes and said something that would shatter the person I had become. But before we get to that moment, I need to tell you who I was. Because the man who went to that cliff was not the same one who came back. My name is Arthur. I'm 65 years old, and for the last 7 years I've been on autopilot. I don't know when I gave up. Maybe it was the year after my wife, Clara, passed. Maybe it was when my son moved across the country, and the silence in our home became a physical presence. The truth is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I had reached a point where I was just going through the motions, a ghost in my own life. My days were a gray, seamless loop. I'd wake at 6:15 a.m., the same time I had for 40 years. I'd make a single cup of coffee in the machine Clara had picked out. I'd drink it at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Then I'd go to work at the accounting firm where I was a partner, a job I'd held for 3 decades. I'd come home. I'd eat a frozen dinner. I'd watch television until I fell asleep in my armchair. Rinse and repeat. My son Ben called every Sunday. "How are you holding up, Dad?" he'd ask. "I'm fine, son." "Just fine," I'd lie. But I wasn't fine. I was a shell. I was the outline of a man, filled with nothing but dust and echoes. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger with tired eyes and a mouth that had forgotten how to form a real smile. My son's wife, Sophia, was the only one who refused to let me fade away completely. She'd visit every other week with a casserole or a book, her excuses as transparent as they were kind. One Tuesday she arrived with a determined look. "Arthur," she said, sitting across from me, "my father, Robert, passed away last month." I nodded, offering the expected condolences. I'd met Robert a handful of times at weddings and holidays. A quiet, retired shipyard worker with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "We're settling his estate," Sophia continued. "And he left behind his old station wagon. It's in perfect condition. Ben and we thought of you. We know your car is on its last legs." She offered it to me for a token sum, a fraction of its value. I think it was their way of forcing a change, of giving me a tangible connection to the world outside my 4 walls. To stop me from rusting away in that house. I accepted, not out of need, but out of a profound weariness that made saying no require more energy than saying yes. The car was a sturdy blue station wagon. It smelled of old leather, pipe tobacco, and salt air. The first few days I used it for my usual routes. Work, the grocery store, the cemetery. One rainy Thursday, stuck in traffic, I idly flicked on the built-in GPS. The screen glowed to life. There were no recent destinations, no favorites. Except for one. A single solitary entry saved and named, "The End of the Line." A chill entirely separate from the damp weather went through me. Felt like a message. A final confession. Or a challenge. That night I couldn't sleep. The name echoed in my mind. The End of the Line. Was it a place? A state of mind? I looked up the coordinates. It was a remote coastal spot, a 2-hour drive away at the edge of a national park. There was nothing there. No town, no facilities. Just a cliff. For 3 days it haunted me. In my sterile, predictable life, this was a mystery. A thread pulling at the fabric of my apathy. On the 4th morning I made a decision. I called in sick to work for the first time in 15 years. I was going. I left at dawn. The GPS guided me out of the city, onto highways I hadn't traveled in years, and finally onto a narrow, winding road that clung to the coastline. The air changed, becoming sharp with the scent of salt and pine. Seagulls cried overhead. With every mile, the tight knot of resignation in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a nervous, thrumming anticipation. The robotic voice announced, "You have arrived at your destination." I pulled into a small gravel pull-off that ended at a weather-beaten fence. Beyond it, the land dropped away to a furious gray ocean. And she was there. An elderly woman, her silver hair whipping in the wind, standing with her back to me, facing the sea. She wore a thick, navy blue coat and stood with a stillness that spoke of infinite patience. I got out of the car. The wind roared in my ears. As I approached, she turned slowly. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were a clear, piercing blue, holding a depth of sorrow and wisdom that stopped me in my tracks. "You came," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, carrying over the wind. I'd started to think no one would. I was frozen. I don't understand. Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor," she said. "And you are driving Robert's car." It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat tight. "Arthur. I'm my daughter-in-law is his daughter." A sad, gentle smile touched her lips. "Then you are family." "In a way." She looked back at the churning water. "This was our place. For 52 years. And then she told me how she and Robert had met as teenagers, how they'd fallen in love here on this very cliff, how her family had disapproved, how they'd been forced apart. She had been sent away, married another man, built a life. Robert had stayed, married Sophia's mother, raised a family. But every month for over 5 decades they had met here. This cliff was their secret sanctuary, their end of the line for the world's demands, the place where they could just be Eleanor and Robert. "He was the love of my life," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "And I was his. We knew it was wrong. We knew we were betraying our families. But this was the one true thing we had. The one thing that was entirely ours." "He was sick for the last year," Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "He couldn't drive here anymore. So I would come alone. I'd stand here and feel him with me." She turned her piercing gaze back to me. "He knew he was dying. The last time we spoke on the phone, he told me he'd left a message. A way for me to know he was thinking of me at the end. He said he'd left the address in his car's GPS. That someone would find it. Someone who needed to find their way here as much as I needed them to." The pieces clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't here by accident. Robert hadn't just forgotten to clear his GPS. He had planted a seed. He had used his final act to orchestrate this meeting. "Why me?" I asked, my voice rough. "I don't know," Eleanor said softly. "But Robert was a good judge of character. He must have seen something in you, even in your brief meetings. A loneliness. A need for a compass." She stepped closer. "He wanted you to find me so I could tell you our story. So you would know that a life of duty without passion is not a life at all. He lived that way for 70 years, Arthur. Don't make it 80. I drove home in a daze." Eleanor's words echoed in the silence of the car, louder than the engine. "A life of duty without passion is not a life at all." The walls of my carefully constructed existence felt paper thin. I walked into my dark, silent house, and for the first time, I didn't feel comfort in the routine. I felt imprisoned by it. I looked at the photo of Clara on the mantelpiece. I had loved her in my way. But had I ever been alive with her? Had I ever loved with the desperate, all-consuming fire that Robert and Eleanor had guarded for half a century? Or had I simply been playing a role? The dependable husband, the reliable father, the diligent accountant. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and allowed myself to feel the vast, empty cavern of my own regret. The next day I didn't go to work. I went to the art supply store, a place I had never set foot in, and bought a set of watercolor paints. When I was a boy I had loved to paint. My father had called it a frivolous hobby. I had put the brushes away at 16 and never picked them up again. My hands were clumsy and shaking as I tried to mix colors. The result was a muddy, childish mess. And I cried. I cried for the boy I had been, for the man I had become, and for the years I had wasted being what everyone else expected me to be. Ben and Sophia came over that Sunday. They found me in the backyard, attempting to sketch the old oak tree. "Dad," Ben said, his voice full of confusion. "Are you painting?" "Trying to," I said, not looking up. Later over coffee I told them. I told them about the GPS, about the cliff, about Eleanor and Robert's 50-year secret. Sophia cried silent tears. Ben was initially angry. All those years he was cheating on Mom? It's not that simple, Ben, Sophia said softly, placing a hand on his arm. It's a tragedy. For everyone. The truth was a wrecking ball swinging through our family's history. But as the dust settled, a strange understanding began to emerge. The story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the profound cost of denying one's own heart. The following Sunday, I drove back to the cliff. Eleanor was there, as I knew she would be. I came back, I said. I knew you would, she replied. We began a new ritual. Every Sunday I would make the drive. We would talk for hours. She told me more about her life, her marriage to a good but distant man, her children, the constant, aching presence of Robert in her heart. I told her about Clara, about my fears, about the hollow man I had allowed myself to become. She became my guide, my confessor. In unburdening myself to her, I was slowly, painstakingly, putting myself back together. Inspired by Eleanor's courage, I began to change my life. I cut my hours at the firm. I turned the spare room into a studio. I started going to a local life drawing class, surrounded by people decades younger than me, and for the first time I didn't feel out of place. I felt curious. I reconnected with an old friend from college, a musician who had always lived life on his own terms. We started having lunch every week. I felt parts of my brain long atrophied spark back to life. 6 months into my transformation, I did something I had been avoiding for years. I visited Clara's grave. I brought my sketchbook. I'm sorry, Clara, I whispered, sitting on the grass beside her headstone. I'm sorry I wasn't more present. I'm sorry I loved you safely from a distance. I think you deserved more fire. It wasn't a confession of wrongdoing, but of awareness. And in that moment, I felt a forgiveness that could only have come from myself. I opened my sketchbook and drew the willow tree that shaded her plot. It was the best thing I had ever drawn. A year after I first met Eleanor, I brought my finished painting to the cliff. It was a seascape, capturing the wild, untamed beauty of that place. The light breaking through the storm clouds. She looked at it for a long time. Robert would have loved this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You've captured the hope in it. So many people only see the despair. We sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He didn't just leave that address for me, Arthur, she said. He left it for you. He was giving you a key. The same key he and I had. A place to remember who you really are. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep that winter. Her family, who knew about Robert and had made their own peace with it, invited me to the small private service. I brought the painting of the cliff and gave it to her daughter. So you'll always remember where her heart was, I said. I still drive the blue station wagon. I never erased the end of the line from the GPS. Now I go to the cliff not out of sorrow but out of gratitude. It is my sanctuary too. My relationship with Ben is deeper now. He sees me, the real me, for the first time. He's even started asking about my art. I am 66 years old now. The man who followed a mysterious GPS signal is not the man writing this. That man was a ghost. I am alive. My days are no longer a gray loop. They are unpredictable, messy, and vibrant. I still do accounting, but only for clients I choose. I paint. I travel. I have friends. I feel the sun on my skin and I am grateful for it. Robert and Eleanor's story was one of a love that could not be. But its final rippling effect was to teach me how to love my own life. They taught me that it is never too late to change your course. That a single curious decision can break a decades-long spell. So, if you feel stuck, if you feel like you're just going through the motions, I beg you, be curious. Follow the strange address. Read the old book. Talk to the stranger. You have no idea what life is waiting for you at the end of the line. A local cafe, owned by the daughter of one of my life drawing classmates, hosted a community art wall. Encouraged by my friend, I submitted my seascape of the cliff. Hanging it there felt more vulnerable than standing before a board of directors. The following week, a small red dot appeared next to it. Sold. The buyer was a woman who said it reminded her of a place her own mother had loved. The money was insignificant. The validation was a seismic shift in my soul. I wasn't just Arthur the retired accountant. I was Arthur the artist. Ben started asking hesitant questions about my painting. One Saturday he showed up at my door with a beginner sketchpad and a look of grim determination. "Show me," he said. We sat in the backyard and I taught my son how to see negative space, how to measure with a pencil. The roles were reversed. I was the teacher, he the student. In the quiet concentration on his face, I saw a bridge being built over years of quiet distance. I drove to the cliff one Sunday to find it empty. No Eleanor. The wind howled and for the first time the place felt truly lonely. I realized I had been coming not just for the view but for her. I sat on our usual rock and felt the full weight of her absence. But then I closed my eyes and heard her voice on the wind. "Keep living, Arthur." I opened my sketchbook and drew the empty space where she used to stand. It was a portrait of loss, but also of enduring memory. Sophia's mother, Robert's widow, asked to see me. I expected anger, resentment. Instead, over tea, she said, "I knew Arthur. Not the details, but I knew his heart was never fully mine. For years I was bitter. But your painting, seeing that place through your eyes, it's given me a strange kind of peace. It was beautiful what they had. Tragic, but beautiful." Her forgiveness was a gift I hadn't known I needed, releasing me from my role as an unwitting bearer of a painful secret. The station wagon, my vessel of transformation, deserved a proper journey. I packed my art supplies, a tent and a map, a real paper one. I drove north along the coast with no itinerary. I slept under stars I hadn't seen since I was a boy. I painted a misty harbor at dawn and a forest of ancient redwoods. For 2 weeks I was gloriously, unreachably lost. I was answering a call Robert had left in the GPS, a call to explore my own world. At a small gallery in a coastal town, I met an elderly artist named Iris. She critiqued my work with a brutal, refreshing honesty. "You have feeling," she said, stabbing a finger at my harbor painting, "but your technique is holding it hostage." She became my unofficial mentor, teaching me about color theory and composition. In her fierce, no-nonsense approach, I found a new kind of companionship, one built on shared passion, not shared grief. I officially retired from the firm. My partners threw me a party. The speeches were about my reliability, my precision, my decades of service. I smiled and thanked them, but the person they were describing felt like a character from a book I'd finished reading. I cleaned out my office, leaving behind a lifetime of files. The only thing I took was a single, dying succulent from the windowsill. I was going to nurse it back to health. Iris introduced me to a weekly sketch group of retirees, a former nurse, a carpenter, a schoolteacher. We met in parks and museums. We were a motley crew, united by the desire to create rather than consume. We argued about light and shadow, shared stories, and laughed with the easy camaraderie of those who have shed their professional skins. I had found my tribe. Ben's sketches improved. He started sharing them with his colleagues at his tech startup. One day he asked if I would run a creativity and mindfulness lunch hour session for his team. Standing in a sleek, modern office, teaching 20-somethings how to see the world through an artist's eyes, was surreal. I was no longer passing a legacy down a family line. I was sending it out into the world. I met a woman in my sketch group. Her name was Cora, a widow who had been a botanist. Our connection wasn't a raging fire like Robert and Eleanor's. It was a slow, steady warmth, like embers in a hearth. We enjoyed quiet dinners, long walks, and the comfortable silence of two people who understand loss but choose to focus on what remains. It was a love born not of desperate passion, but of deep, resonant compatibility. On the anniversary of my first meeting with Eleanor, I drove Ben and Sophia to the cliff. I told them the whole story again, not as a shocking secret, but as a parable. Their love was a locked room, I said, but the key they left behind wasn't for that room. It was for the prison I had built for myself. Don't build prisons for yourselves. Inspired by Robert's indirect gift to me, I started a small informal project. I began leaving my own clues. I would paint small, beautiful scenes on rocks and leave them in parks with a note on the back. If this moves you, keep it. Your curiosity is a gift. It was my way of paying the strange cosmic debt forward, of being someone else's Robert. I received a letter from Eleanor's daughter. She had found a box of her mother's things, including a diary. In it, Eleanor had written about our meetings. "A strange and wonderful thing has happened," she wrote. "Robert sent me a friend. In helping Arthur find his way back to life, I have found a new purpose in my own final chapter. We are saving each other." I wept, understanding then that our relationship had been a mutual rescue mission. I stand now at the cliff, not at the end of my story, but at the beginning of a new one. The wind is the same, but I am different. I am a father, a friend, an artist, a student, a teacher. I am a man who learned to love his life. The end of the line was never a destination. It was a starting point. It was the place where the old Arthur ended, and the real one finally began. Robert's final message wasn't a confession of a secret love. It was a map out of a quiet despair. And the greatest tribute I can pay to him and Eleanor is to live the rest of my days with my eyes and my heart wide open. The road ahead is unwritten, and for the first time in decades, that feels like the greatest gift imaginable. A letter arrived from a curator at a small city gallery. They had seen my work from the cafe and heard of my rock project. They were hosting an exhibition titled Late Bloomers, featuring artists who found their voice after 60. They wanted 3 of my seascapes. The professional recognition was a shock. It wasn't a community wall anymore. This was real. Fear and pride warred within me. I said yes. Suddenly, painting wasn't just a joy. It was a task with a deadline. The blank canvases in my studio seemed to mock me. I struggled, overworking pieces until they lost their soul. Iris, my mentor, came over, took one look at my strained face, and mixed a bold, reckless streak of crimson across a failed sky. "Stop trying to be an artist," she grumbled. "Just be Arthur. The rest is nonsense." The spell was broken. Cora invited me to her home for the first time. Her backyard was a stunning glass-paneled greenhouse, a vibrant jungle of exotic plants. The air was thick and sweet. She showed me a rare orchid, explaining it only blooms once every 7 years. "It doesn't rush," she said, her hand gently on a leaf. "It knows its time will come." I saw my own journey reflected in that patient, stubborn plant. The gallery was packed. Ben, Sophia, Cora, and my sketch group were all there. Seeing my paintings, Eleanor's cliff, Harbor Dawn, the rescued succulent, hung under spotlights was surreal. A critic asked about my process. I heard myself say, "It's not a process. It's a recovery. I'm recovering the man I was supposed to be before life told him to be practical." The words felt truer than any financial report I'd ever given. A major piece, The Rescued Succulent, sold for a sum that would have taken me months to earn as an accountant. The buyer, a young tech entrepreneur, said it reminded him that growth can happen in the most unlikely conditions. The irony was not lost on me. The money wasn't just money. It was a tangible measure of the value of my newfound soul. Ben and Sophia announced they were moving back to the city, much closer to me. The reason, to be near family. My transformation had subtly shifted the family's center of gravity. I was no longer a problem to be managed from a distance, but a magnet drawing them closer. The empty nest was filling again, but on new, healthier terms. The community center, hearing of my late bloomer's success, asked me to teach a weekly art class for seniors. The first day, I looked out at 20 faces filled with the same doubt I once had. I didn't start with technique. I started with Robert and Eleanor's story. I saw tears, nods, and the flicker of recognition. I was no longer just a student, I was a guide. I had a vivid dream. Robert and Eleanor were young, painting together at the cliff. They turned and smiled at me, not with sadness but with bright, encouraging joy. Then they faded and I was left alone at the easel, but I felt no loneliness, only a profound sense of carrying the torch. I woke up feeling lighter, as if I had finally received their official blessing. Cora the botanist and I started a collaboration. I would paint her rare flowers, and she would provide the scientific and common names, weaving in stories of their origins. It was a fusion of art and science of our two worlds. We started a blog, The Painted Petal, which quickly gathered a small, devoted following. Our partnership was deepening root and branch. I hit a wall, a period of creative drought where every brushstroke felt wrong. The joy vanished, replaced by the old, familiar gray. I feared I had used up my one story, my one transformation. I stopped going to the cliff, stopped painting. The ghost of the old Arthur whispered that this had all been a fleeting, foolish fantasy. Cora didn't try to cheer me up. She simply showed up at my door with a picnic basket and drove me to the botanical gardens. She didn't mention art. She talked about soil pitch and parasitic vines. Ben called and asked for advice on a corporate logo, treating my eye as a valuable asset. My sketch group dragged me out for coffee. They surrounded me not with pressure, but with normalcy. Their faith became my lifeline. Frustrated one afternoon, I threw a pot of watery blue paint across a large canvas. It splattered and dripped in a chaotic, unpredictable pattern. Instead of panicking, I leaned in. I added charcoal, pastel, even pressed leaves from Cora's garden into the paint. I broke every rule I had just learned. The result was a messy, textured, emotional piece I titled Breaking the Loop. It was my favorite thing I'd ever made. The money from my art sales felt separate from my old life. I decided to use a large portion of it to fund a small arts grant for the community center, named informally the Robert and Eleanor Curiosity Grant. It would provide supplies and scholarships for seniors wanting to explore a new creative path. Their love story was now funding new beginnings for others. A local writer, fascinated by the story behind Late Bloomers, asked to interview me for a series on second acts. Reliving the journey in such detail was emotionally exhausting but cathartic. It forced me to see the narrative arc of my own life, the long plateau, the catalytic moment, the steep, rewarding climb. 1 year after the gallery opening, I returned to the cliff with Cora. I didn't paint. We just sat, her head on my shoulder, watching the waves. "You know," she said softly, "you don't have to keep proving it to anyone, not even to yourself. You're here. You're living. That's enough." It was the permission I needed to simply be without constantly becoming. One of my students from the community center, a shy woman named Harriet who had never held a brush before, sold her first painting. It was a simple, joyful bowl of fruit, but it was hers. Her tearful hug of thanks was a greater reward than any gallery review. I was part of a chain of inspiration now. Ben helped Cora and me turn the Painted Petal blog into a beautiful website. We started selling prints and note cards. Orders trickled in from across the country. My world, which had once shrunk to the size of my living room, was now expanding through digital threads, connecting with people who found solace in our art and nature partnership. The blue station wagon, my faithful companion, finally began to show its age. The repairs were becoming costly. It was time. Selling it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. But I didn't erase the GPS. I took a photo of the screen with the end of the line displayed. That wasn't a location. It was a state of mind I now carried within me. Cora and I started a new ritual. Every Sunday, instead of me driving to the cliff alone, we would explore a new trail, a new park, a new vista. We called it Finding the New Line. The world was full of them, and we were committed to the joint adventure of discovery, our sketchbooks and plant presses always in tow. I stand in my sunlit studio. On the easel is an unfinished painting, a tangle of green vines from Cora's greenhouse, bursting with impossible vibrant flowers. It's messy, alive, and full of potential. I don't know exactly how it will end, and that's the point. The story isn't about arriving at a destination. It's about the courage to begin the journey, and the grace to keep walking, no matter your age. Robert's GPS didn't lead me to the end of the line. It led me back to the very start of my own. And this time I plan to enjoy the ride.